All right, welcome. We are Game 2015 in the winter 2018 semester at George Brown, and today we are talking about virtual reality development and Agile. So things to note about this class, I'll be an instructor, that's me, teaching since 2011, background in software engineering. I have 1,400 and something videos on YouTube, that's what I do. It keeps growing. But the videos are here. I'm not recording you. I'm recording my desktop. I'm recording what we talk about in class, so that and broadcasting it live. So worst case scenario, if you're away or if you're remote, you can still be participate in the class. Sometimes that won't be possible to be remote because this is a project-based class, and I need you guys to be all participatory and stuff, right? So, but the advantage is that we'll be covering some stuff. Again, some of the stuff that Professor Alir is covering in the lecture, I'll be covering some of it in lab and then expanding on it, doing some of the tech part in terms of we're using Unity 3D this semester with VR. However, going back to what we were just talking about, I don't mind if we use AR. You make an AR kind of application, which is also possible in Unity. They have really cool plugins now with Unity 2017 W2018. As well as MR, if you're interested in doing that. Now, there's not as much support for that. But if you want to do that, as long as you use Unity and C#, I'm good. Okay, so sky's the limit in terms of the type of what we create. We have to narrow in on the scope because we only have 13 short weeks. 12 of them are going to be the ones we're in class. One of them is going to be used for some midterm tests, which we're going to talk about. And I only have 2 hours with you every week. Okay, so based on our time together. I wanted to talk about briefly on the schedule, so I'm going to bring that up right now before I go into everything else we're talking about. So this is your outline, and I just wanted to talk about it quickly. So the book, there are two books. One of them is Agile Game Development with Scrum. It's a 2010 book about Agile, but actually really nice. It's really good, very clear, and it's all game related. So it's not a software engineering book about Agile. And I think it's good that it's relevant to what we're doing. Still relevant today. Not much has changed in terms of how we use Agile to produce games. And the other book that's a little dated, and I'd like to see if I can get something, some other materials to help us bolster this one, is Unity Virtual Reality Projects. It's a pack book, and it's working with Unity 3D. For 2005. So sorry, Unity 5, not 2017. So it's a little bit old. So maybe like, it's a couple years old. 2015 version, I think the book is, which means that it's the older version of Unity. And some of the stuff, especially things like effects, some of the things that were all part of Unity at the time have been broken out into their components, into downloads, things that you can get from the asset store. So we're going to talk about those things. That's kind of the book that I'm going to be using as a reference, but I'm going to be, again, adding some additional material in there so we have something to talk about, again, starting next week. We will have certain labs. There'll be lab exercises, and I'll be talking about them. Mostly they'll be around what you're going to be producing in class from an Agile perspective as well as Unity, right? So how this class evolved is the only class you actually learn Agile project management. This is the class to do that. So we're going to use project-based learning to do our project. Okay, so do our main stuff that we're going to do this semester. That doesn't mean that it's a production class. I don't expect you to treat it like a production class. It's not going to have the same intensity as we had when we did Game Production 2 for the people who are with me. But you will be forming teams, you will be making contracts, you'll do all the stuff. You'll go through the process as if you're building something a little larger than what you're building, only because it'll give you the sense of what it feels like to be in an Agile project management team. So to simulate some of that, as well as I've learned a couple things just over the times when I've used teams, and teams suck, right? I mean, I have to say, at times, sometimes you have great teams, and people who stay together in a team is fantastic. And other times, teams can be a real pain in the ass because you have to depend on other team members to produce. So I'm going to give you guys a contract. And if you join me on Slack, I have a Slack channel for this. I've already dropped the contract on the Slack channel. that I'm going to create a Dropbox on Blackboard where you can kind of upload your contract next week, and it'll be probably worth something like 5% of your final grade. All right. So why is that? Because this is the contract that says, hey, we're going to work together. We're going to communicate. We're going to meet together every Thursday, as an example. You know, for anything that we have to do outside of the class for the project. You know, kind of agreements. And then what happens if someone doesn't do their work? You know, we're going to flag him or her as unproductive, right? That's what we're going to do. So there's a system of doing that. I'm also going to do, in addition to the contract, every time we produce a milestone, for example, if we do our first playable like we did last time, again, when I say first playable and some of the stuff that we're doing that we did in game production, we're not going to definitely put on the same details because you're not making a game with the web. You're going to have Unity. You're going to have it's going to be a little lighter. Hopefully it won't be as bad. But on that, when you produce your first playable, your alpha, your beta, and your final release, all those things, you're going to be doing a peer review for your team and saying something like, hey, you know what? Here's your team members. You know, let's say Corey was going to do his review on the team. He would say, you know what? I think Terry did a great job. He did 5 out of 5, you know, whatever. Just saying. And then, you know, he's also going to rate himself. So Corey, you know, Corey, he did 5 out of 5, right? But let's say, for example, I don't know, Terry says that Corey did a 1 out of 5, right? And then the rest of the team says the same thing. Like they don't like Corey, right? For whatever reason. Then we can, it's a good early warning indicator that I can go back to the team and say, okay, guys, there's a discrepancy. Because what I found is when we don't talk about it, it's like there's something called social loafing that happens where the team doesn't work. It's just, you know, 4 out of 6 people, 2 people work, and 4 other people like kind of tag along and they kind of do stuff. That can't be for this semester. Everyone's got to do a little bit of work. I mean, I'm not expecting a whole lot from you guys in terms of production, but I do expect you guys to be able to understand the terminology of Agile, VR. We're going to be also talking about VR stuff, not just around Agile. So Unity tells us how to. It's more of a how-to book, that pack book. But I also want to talk about what VR is, how to do VR, what's good things and bad things about doing VR, those kind of things. And I think we're going to have a chance to do that this semester pretty good. So that's, we're going to do some lab stuff. There's going to be some assignments, but the assignments are all going to be related to the project. So one of the assignments that I'm going to give you next week as an example is fill out your contract. That's an assignment, right? There might be another assignment that says something like, you know, your first playable. Here's your first playable. This is what you have to do for the first playable, right? And so on. There's going to be a few things. You might have to do a small game design document, right? Yeah. We'll see if we have the time. I mean, remember, we only have a 2-hour class. Yeah, we don't have a class like the time to do that. We may elect not to. I may get you to do one presentation instead of the final test, which is happening, you know, in the last week class. I may get you to do one presentation throughout the entire class. Yeah, and that's where I want to push. I want to push Alir to do that. If he's okay with that, that'll save you a final exam. It'll be more practical, and it'll show us a culmination of everything you've kind of put up, you know, gone up with, up until that time. What was that? Something like that. And then I don't know. Maybe if we're going to do another one, it'll be one of the first ones where we talk about your concept. But we'll see how that goes because we may not have the time for it. So that's the thing. Again, it's not a game production class. So I don't expect you to do big presentations and all that stuff. So the midterm test, though, I want you to think about this. It says along with coding questions. Yeah, there might be, but I'm going to mostly go through Agile. So when we talk about Agile artifacts, like for example, what's a, what does a, Scrum Master do, as an example? And then there'll be a thing about what's a Scrum Master doing, or if I'm going to do some kind of review meeting, for Agile, what does that entail, right? What does a sponsor do? What is a user story? What is the product backlog? Those kind of things. These are the things you need to know, basics about Agile project management that we'll be talking about. And then so I'll ask you questions around that. So you need to know those kinds of things. I won't be asking you questions, though, about like what's GitHub or, how do you put a Unity script together? I won't be asking about those things. Yeah. And Scrum Master is totally different. A producer is, I mean, they could have the same role, but typically they're separate entities, right? A producer worries about, getting the whole game done, right? A Scrum Master might be in charge of one particular sprint, right? Or you might go to him if you've got issues with your particular sprint. And there might be other things. Well, we'll talk about that as we go forward. And Alir also is going to be giving you that information from the book. I'll just be going over those topics again and clarifying. So, there are differences. But at the end of the day, we'll be going through all that stuff. So the final test is scheduled. Now it's worth 20. And instead of giving you a final test of 20%, I'd rather do a presentation and showing your work, let's see what you produced with Agile this semester. It doesn't have to be phenomenal, guys. I want to be like, hey, this is us. Here's what we produced with Agile. This is our team. And it kind of, like I said, is a culmination of the work we've been doing. No, I mean, everyone would have to be here, but then just like the same format we did last time, which makes sense. I'm not going to make people present. I want the group to present. Here's my group presentation, but not everyone has to talk. So it's just the people who make sense, right? So here's the week outline in a nutshell. We have an introduction, why we need software engineering methodologies, traditional waterfall versus agile. I think he covered that a little bit. I'm going to cover that again a little bit with my few slides that I got. So this is using the Agile book, chapters 1 and 2. That's this week. And then if we notice that on week 2, next week, we're going to start with the other book, which is on Unity and VR projects in Unity. That's what's going to happen next week. Now it says introduction to the Oculus Rift. Obviously, we're not going to have, an Oculus Rift. So far, that's not the plan for next week. But what I will be doing is talking about Unity. So we'll be doing Unity in class next week. So we'll be doing a bit of a review, how to set up a VR project in Unity. That kind of stuff is what's scheduled for next week when we get together. So you can notice that there are some weeks we're going to be more agile, and some weeks we kind of do some more VR. But most of the weeks, if you see it, is like, hey, I'm creating an agile team. I'm doing how do I use a Pivotal Tracker, which is a tool, an agile tool? How do I do that? And there's other tools you can use out there as well that are just as valuable. All right, so that's really what it is. Notice that we also have an intercession break around week 5 of our time frame together. So in a few weeks, we'll do 4 weeks in a row, a month, and then we'll have a month off, a week off, which is the week of February 26th to March 2nd for people who don't know. And then we'll be coming back, and then we'll have a midterm test. We'll have a kind of a day coming back. We'll have a review. I'll do a little bit of review with you guys, go through some terminology. Midterm test. The midterm test will be all-inclusive, so we'll be covering most of the Agile stuff that we've learned up until that point. And again, I'd like to try and not have a final, but if we do have a final test, for whatever reason, it will not be cumulative. Right? So I'm not going to sit there and go, hey, you need to know everything, all the terminology from the first and second test. It'll just be like, hey, this part is separate and the other part is separate, just so you guys know, if I do it that way. Okay, so that's your tests. And then again, we have a shortened semester this semester, so we'll be done in 13 weeks instead of 14. Any questions around our schedule or outline? It's pretty straightforward. Back to this. So we want to talk about the difference a little bit between Agile and Waterfall. You guys had a conversation with, or Alir kind of went over the book details. And to me, Agile makes sense. It makes sense for project management, especially for games. And we can see this if we look at this comes right out of the book, and he's probably showing you this as well. The idea that we start off with a concept and move into the design phase, and then from there coding, and then getting assets, testing and debugging. This idea, that's why it's called Waterfall. It's almost like a transition from one phase into the next. Traditionally, with Waterfall project management, we do a lot of planning up front. And the problem with that is it's difficult for us to pivot. We're not, so I hate to say this, agile enough to move into, to change our project, to not just make it functional, but to make it fun. And part of the Agile methodology is how can we find the fun out of our project. We can make a game. Corey and I and Terry, let's say 3 of us get together and make a game. Sorry, I'm not trying to, kind of disclude anybody. Let's say the 3 of us get together. Corey comes up with this great idea, pew, right? Terry's the designer and maybe he's a software engineer. He wants to kind of implement it. We make it functional, but then it's not fun, right? So yeah, did we finish our project? We finished. It's done. We completed it, but it's not fun. And even when with Agile, there's no guarantee that the game you're going to make is fun if you meet the requirements. One of the things I kind of have a problem with when I talk with students is, hey, here's all the things what I want you to use. I want you to make this kind of game. And if I give you enough requirements to make a game, you'll make that game. It may not be fun. You may not want to do it. And it's almost like I'm pigeonholing you into making something because I want to be able to compare you with others. I have to, in an academic environment, I have to give you some kind of restrictions. But at the same time, what that does is it makes you create something that maybe you wouldn't have done on your own, right? So here's kind of the same thing. It might be functional, but yet not fun, regardless whether we use Waterfall or Agile. But you can see here that this may not make sense. And even though this says there's like 5 little boxes here, I'm telling you that concept and design take up at least a third of Waterfall. You do a lot of planning up front. There's a lot, you front load a lot of time. And when you get to coding, it may not work. In fact, the uncertainty level is still quite high until you get right to the coding part. And I'm not talking about uncertainty, can we do it? Because you're going to plan a lot of stuff when it comes to traditional Waterfall. But uncertainty in terms of, is this even the game we want to make? Like, is this going to turn out to something that's going to be interesting or whatever? Or we're going to cancel this project finally. The Agile Manifesto talks about, 4 key points, which is, and things that I probably would ask on a test, things like, think about value, individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Back in the day when I was in enterprise, we'd always talk about these 3 pillars of operations, which is, people, process, and tools. It would always be the same thing, people, process, and tools. And not to say that process and tools are important, but Agile focuses more on people. And this is a good thing again, because it's not about, hey, I'm going to, create a process, a workflow. I'm going to, create something like that. It's not around that. It's around, hey, how can I, create an interaction where I can iterate through a process, right, to create something that's unique, that's fun. And if I don't know how to do it, I'm going to pivot maybe a number of times until I create the project that I'm looking at. Customer collaboration. So I'm working with customers over negotiation. I'm not trying to negotiate with them. I'm going to work with them to get what they're looking for. My customer could be the sponsor. It could be the founders of the small indie studio. It could be a lot of different things. And responding to change over following a plan. So that means that, hey, you know what? I'm going to be able to pivot. That's why it's called Agile. I want to pivot. I'm going to go down a path. I might have a goal, but I may not reach that particular goal. It might be close, but we're going to get something where it's close to what we were looking at, maybe even better than we thought it was going to be. So again, talking about uncertainty, when we start off a project, from a very high level, when we start concepting, lots of uncertainty. We don't know what we want. We're putting brainstorming ideas together when we're doing a project, just like we've done before in game production, right? We start off, we throw some stuff on the board, we try to think about what we're trying to make, right? And then as we go closer and closer to deployment, right, where implementation phase is coming into play, the uncertainty goes down, right? Because it's starting to come together. Our ideas are starting to form out into code and those kind of things. And that's the kind of stuff that Ilir probably had spoken to you guys already about, right? So this isn't different than, from Waterfall and Agile are the same in this way. You want to try and reduce uncertainty. The difference between Agile and Waterfall in this particular case is we use iteration to do that. A good example that I used earlier today was when you're doing any kind of technical art. Let's suppose, hey, I'm not an artist. People say that all the time. Hey, I'm not an artist. But I want to talk about myself as a technical artist. I want to build a landscape in Unity, right? Or I want to build a landscape in Blender. However I'm doing it in a 3D environment, I'm going to start off blocking out my scene. And this is what my scene looks like. Here's where the mountain is going to be. Here's where maybe a lake is going to be. Here's where I'm going to have a copse of trees. Here's where I'm going to do stuff. I block it out first. And I want to do after that is then I iterate. Okay, now what am I going to add? I need some textures for the trees. I want to talk about, what type of trees am I going to put here? How is the lake? How deep is the lake going to be? Is there going to be, what type of texture am I going to put around the lake? Is there going to be mud? Is there going to be sand texture? And so I start thinking about those kinds of things. Then I think about the texture. I think about, hey, can I add some more topology in those areas to make it more realistic looking? Cool, so I do that. And then I keep doing that kind of stuff until I get more and more detailed, until it's right. And one of the things that we talk about when you're a technical artist is it's not right until it is. Okay, so I want to, that's something that I can share with you that I figured out. Think about as we're moving away, we're way out here, we're prototyping. We get into this idea of pre-production. And again, I'm not a big fan of too much pre-production. Like in the first semester together, you guys spent a whole semester in pre-production, right? When you guys did Game Production 1, remember that experience? Whole semester. And then when we came to Game Production 2, you pivoted. Some of you drastically. Like the game you were thinking about making in first semester didn't get made in second semester. Some of you made the game, right? But so again, too much work in pre-production is almost against agile methodologies, right? You don't want to go there. You want to kind of have a short pre-production process where you understand what you're looking at. You start creating something called the product backlog. And then, and that's done by really talking about a narrative called user stories, right? Now, I don't know if Ilya talked about that at all, but think about user stories. One of the ideas that I had, and I did this other course where we did a Lego simulation. So I wanted all of you to get together with me and let's build a Lego city. So I gave you guys all different colored Lego bricks. Here's the scenario. And then I said, okay, we're going to iterate. We're going to create a backlog of buildings that we're going to make. So I said something like this. As a mayor, I want my citizens to meet and discuss city issues, right, in a particular location. So tell me, what kind of building would it speak to? What, some kind of city hall or whatever. So you see, I talked about the problem that I had. This is my idea. As a mayor, this is what I want to do. This is my scenario, my narrative, right? And then you figured out the solution. So we're not solutioning when we're talking about user stories. We're talking about things like, hey, this is what we're looking at. This is the feature I want to kind of build. Here's the solution, how we're going to build it, right? What we're going to build to take care of that particular user scenario. And as we go forward, you're going to see that that's a really keen, process. We're going to put all this stuff on something called the product backlog, right? Which is, again, a technical term that you guys are going to know about Agile and that we're going to test you on the midterm test, 100%. The product backlog, you're going to take stuff from the product backlog and you're going to incorporate some of those features into something called a sprint. And a sprint is something as an activity that we're going to undertake. Normally in the real world, it's 2 to 4 weeks that we do some kind of activity where we build something out. We actually start coding, right? Now, sometimes it's not that kind of sprint. Sometimes it's a sprint to concept out your work. You might have a sprint all around concepting, right? Or a sprint on pre-production where you pull together your ideas and you start creating your backlog. You might have a sprint on creating your backlog. You don't have a backlog yet, and you're going through all your user stories trying to figure out which makes sense for your particular game. All right. This slide to me speaks around plan versus actual. Sometimes you have a plan that it's going to go pretty smooth, right? You're going to start off pre-production, you're going to stop pre-production, you're going to go right into production. And sometimes it doesn't happen. Sometimes things go pear-shaped. And you have some part of you're starting, you're still in pre-production, and then some other parts you're already in production. That's why it's kind of a slant. You may start off producing some stuff when other parts of your project are in pre-production. So plan versus actual. It doesn't always go the way you think it's going to go, and it transitions naturally, how it's meant to transition. I like this slide because, and this goes, again, right out of the book. So I have a goal. Here's my original goal, way up here. And you know what? I have another iteration, and it's leading us down with a little bit of pivoting down to another goal, right? And the reason why this is a good slide, although I would have drawn it differently, maybe I would have drawn my goals up at the top, and made it more of a positive slide because it looks like we're going down, right? But the idea here is not that we're going down, but rather that the goal that you originally intended to go with, it's a good goal, but you're going to pivot through the time that you iterate with Agile to find the fun. That's what you're doing. And when you do that, you're going to reach some other goal that's very related and close to what you were looking at, but not exactly the original goal that you set out. And this is part of it. You're going towards a goal, and you can be as specific as you want to get there, but you may have to pivot. This slide's a great one. This is what I was just talking about, right? So you can see that lots of people involved here in this slide, right? On the left, you've got your publisher and your studio, your management. The studio management and the product owner might be the same people, right? Especially if you're an indie studio, they might be the founders, right? So these are the people that are thinking about, creating your game. You also have some kind of potential players. You want to kind of create a target market or a persona, right, of people that are going to play. Typically for us, it's people 18 to 25 that we're going to be targeting. Anything older than that, like people my age, it's the wrong demographic, right, typically for any game. Why? Because most players are in that 18 to 25 sweet spot. Some of us, though, I mean, there's still quite a lot of, older players nowadays, especially as game systems and consoles mature, that are still playing games into their 40s and 50s. Not a problem. But for the most part, it's these 18 to 25-year-olds that you're going to be targeting. They're the people that want to try the new stuff and all those kind of things. And whatever your target market is, for example, if you're making a serious game, it might be someone else. But you have to identify who your potential players are going to be, right? And that's going to really determine the features of your game. You're going to start building up your features in something called a product backlog. So please take note, because that will be on your test. Product backlog means I have all these features that I'm going to basically outline. All these features, right? Whatever they are. And we're going to brainstorm to get there, to kind of develop those features, right? And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, okay, I'm going to create these small teams of 6 people. Now, typical successful teams from like a sprint team perspective, you might have a larger organization, but you want to break your organization down into teams of about 6 people. It's just proven from a research perspective and historically that groups around 6 work the best. Groups of 7 and 8, it's too big. Groups of 4 and 5 is too small. And the reason for that is you might lose a member. Like it happened to us in game production where we lost some people sometimes, right? And if you gain a member, if you go to 7, it's not going to kill you. But if you lose 2 members out of a group of 4, now you're down to a group of 2. It's undoable, right? So you need to have a good sweet spot of people. 6, a hexagon of people, if anything, is the perfect size, right? That's what we found. Sorry? No. So when you start off, no 7 people. So when you start off and when you think about this, so I have this stuff I want to build. Maybe I have concept to do. Maybe I'm going to be doing some coding to develop some part of my game, right? And I have a bunch of these user stories. These user stories, these part of our backlog, are going to come off our backlog for our sprint, our activity, whatever we're going to be doing. And they're going to be transferred to something called the sprint backlog. So you have 2 backlogs. The product backlog, which is all of your features you're going to get for the game that you can think of at that particular moment in time. And then the sprint backlog, which is a group of features that you think you can complete in 2 to 4 weeks. Okay? So you may be wrong. Maybe, for example, your sprint velocity might be too high. You might have taken on more than you can chew, right? Like you said, okay, I want to do these 10 features in 2 weeks or 4 weeks or whatever it's going to be. And you only got 8 of them done, right? So out of the 10 features, 2 of them go back on the product backlog because you weren't able to complete them for whatever reason. That sprint was a failure. In order for you to have a sprint that's successful, everything must be completed. That's typically how it's done. Now, some people, again, change that because depending on the organization, there might be a certain number to hit or whatever for you to make the sprint successful. But at the end of the day, what you want to try and do is don't bite off more than you can chew. And when you do your sprint retrospective, again, another key word that you need to understand, you're going to kind of say, hey, how do we do for this sprint? Did we really do well? Did we suck? Was it efficient? Right? All that kind of stuff. And if it was efficient, then we're going to try and bite off the same amount of user stories off of the backlog. You're going to try and take more of that stuff backlog every iteration. And you're going to do more and more sprints until you reach to a milestone. For example, the first playable. That would be your first milestone, right? Lots of iterations. You're going to get to the milestone, your first playable. Once you get your first playable, you're also going to be in the process adding to your backlog, right? Because you're going to learn more about the game. You don't know what the game is. It's almost like when you're writing a story, as you're writing the character in the story, you're learning about the character, right? It's almost like you're developing the story. He or she is speaking to you when you're writing the story. So too does the game or the application speak to you as you're writing it. You're figuring it out that this is taking on its own life, right? And then as you continue to iterate, you're going to put more stuff back onto the backlog, new ideas that you've gone. This is called pivoting. You're going to say, hey, well, this is a really nice feature to have, and I think it's going to add value. It's going to hit our potential players even nicer. And guess what? The market has changed. Some new game has come out, and it's really hot, and they have a really cool idea. We want to incorporate that kind of idea. It would fit perfectly in our game, so we're going to add it to the backlog, right? Now, we have to keep in mind, this is where the Scrum Master and the producer come into play and say, hey, wait a minute. If there's too many things that keep entering the backlog, you'll never finish. Because as you iterate, you'll keep pulling stuff off the backlog and putting new things on there, and then it'll just be a never-ending story. A project, by its definition, we start. It has a unique start and a unique end. Okay? It's not operations. It doesn't continue forever. So we create our project, and when we're done, it's over. At the end, these sprints that keep happening 2 to 4 weeks with a retrospective and everything, we continue to improve our game in different iterations until we have all the different releases that we need to create our product. Okay, so really what we're doing is we're making a unique product. That's what a project's all about. And you can see that we move from concept to pre-production. Again, I'm not sure if there would be that many releases from a pre-production perspective. Right? Again, they just drew a bunch of boxes here. We do some production. The production is where we do most of our work, right? We have a bunch of releases and milestones in the production phase. And then we're in post-production, where we actually produce our game, market it, and so on, and all that kind of stuff. So this is a very high-level overview of, and probably already covered by Ilir, but I wanted to hit it again for you guys because I wanted to make sure you guys are clear the kind of stuff we're going to be talking about on the midterm tests. Right, so you understand the terminology we're going to be using and that you should know about. Okay, so I'm sure that, and again, I'm just asking this question. Ilir, give you guys slides.
He didn't give them to us. He showed us.
Okay, I'm going to put them back up. Mine come from the same book as his. Excuse me, but he's got his own set of slides. He does things his own way. He's going to explain things his way. All I'm doing is clarifying it from my perspective, from a game. You know, if I'm making a game, how does it look? What am I making? How am I doing it? Right. I'm currently in the process of making a game, right? It's not just, like that we're doing this kind of stuff. We're currently making a 2v2 mech combat game, and I've been making that for the last year or so, right? So it's, something that we've been doing with C++ and OpenGL, right? It's a small little project, and we're looking to go to level up. So hopefully we'll see you guys there when we go, okay? Anyway, at the end of the day, this is really the organizational workflow that I want you to think about. There's not a lot that I wanted to give you today. This is one. I've also created, like I spoke earlier about, a Slack team, and I want to share that with you as well. It is called, this one, Game2015 W2018, right? Which is Game 2015. That's the virtual reality development. In the winter 2018 semester. As I said, please join with your georgebrown.ca email if you haven't had a chance to already. And if for the people that are in the first session that I wasn't able to do this with because we didn't have a clear plan of what we were doing on Wednesday, then I'd ask if you can talk to your peers in that group as well and let them know, and I'll see them next week anyway. I've also dragged and dropped a contract template on there for you guys because, like I said, I want you guys to create teams of 6. And I'll put this up on Blackboard as well later on. So let's bring that contract up for a second. So if I was to look at the contract, I don't want to do that right now. Let's try this out. Here it is. And let's take a look. So this is a contract that when it comes up that I've been using in the other institutions I've been working as well. You have your team. Please, you're going to come up with your own team name again. You can use the same team that you had before if you're in the same group. Or you can create a new team. But I want a team name. Team logo is what I'm going to be looking for next week. with your team members, their student number, and some kind of contact information, at least an email is what I'm looking for. And I think this is a really great way of doing things. In the contract, you're going to have some basic team expectations, things like we understand that throughout the course, all team members are designated as developers. So even though I might give you a role as producer, you're not just producing, you're developing too. I want you guys to be involved in coding and all that kind of stuff, Unity. Obviously, it's not going to be talking about TypeScript, but rather Unity and C#. I did update this thing earlier today. You'll be able to communicate all decisions and technologies and techniques and all that kind of stuff. You'll be talking about the yellow areas are really things that you're going to modify. You're going to say team meetings will occur at this particular date and time. What happens when a member is left absent or sick or something? Are you going to take notes, meeting minutes? Again, I don't expect you guys to meet very, very long for this particular course because it's not a production course. This is a project-based course, but I don't expect it to be the full-blown Game Production 2 class that we did when we did together. I want you guys to, kind of be organized in terms of what you're delivering and that everyone's doing what they're doing. That's the kind of meeting that I want you guys to have, a productive meeting. If you want to make it a work meeting, you can, but it's not something that I require. Expectations. So what happens if, a team member is assigned a task that they can't complete? They're going to talk to people that are part of maybe other gaming students that they can help them out. This is the kind of contract I want you to put together. What if a member is unable to complete the contract or the whatever they've been given because they just don't know how to do it, right? As an example. Then obviously you want to come ask me, you want to talk to your team members. And these are just examples. You don't have to use this exact example. The thing that I want you to focus on is what happens when people don't do what they're supposed to do. And this is why I put this whole thing together in the first place for you, or using it anyway. I'm using it from another institution. I want you to think about this. Let's read this together a little bit. In the event that team requirements are not met, some of the repercussions may include having a team member flagged as non-productive. And what this means is that they're going to get 0 for that particular release, right? So if I have a release, like for example, an alpha or first playable, and let's say, for example, I'm sorry, Corey, I always use you, but you're there. Corey is not productive. And let's say, for example, Terry marks him and his team get together and they say, Corey's not working out, he's not productive, and they come to me and they let me know. And they've also reviewed him. They've done a peer review, it's kind of staying the same. And then we talk to Corey, and then Corey says, you know what? You're right. I've been busy. I've got something happened. Because something's happened during the semester, right? This is school. This is not real world, right? And he can't produce. So then, Corey's will be given a chance to fix it up. And if he doesn't, he'll get 0. If he does, no harm, no foul. And the next release, we don't even think about what happened before. All right. So each release has its own kind of, a scope. One thing to also note is there might be amendments to the contract. For example, let's say Terry is part of Corey's team and he wants to leave and go to another team, your team over there, as an example, right? And maybe one of your team members wants to leave and join their team, right? Well, then the contract will not hold for you the way it is, right? So you have to amend the contract and say that, well, now you're part of their team and Terry's left, right? As an example. So the agreement you're going to put in the team name, please don't leave in this team name. That would be just, a placeholder. I know I have to say that every time. People laugh at me, but it's really true. They leave team name in there. That would be really bad. Do not call yourself team name, okay? Yeah, just insert something there. So you're going to come up with expectations. You're going to sign off on it like this. As an example, you're going to have a sign off where you put everyone's names in there and say, yes, we sign off, we agree. And then once this is done, you have a small contract that really talks about, hey, this is what we're doing, okay? We're going to be together until the end of the semester, and after the semester is done, we're not going to be together anymore. But during semester, we're going to be productive, and we all agree that we're going to work together to produce something. And when we don't produce something, if someone's not really pulling their weight, we're going to let the instructor know, we're going to flag that person as non-productive, and then if they continue not to be non-productive, then they're going to get a 0 for every release until they are, right? Like I said earlier, this is up on Slack. There's also going to be a peer review form that I will be giving to you guys every major release. So every time we do a release, first playable, alpha, beta, final release, whatever, you'll have a chance to review your peers from a 1 to 5, where 5, they're fully productive, and 1 or 0, they didn't do any work, right? And you might say, well, how's that going to affect my mark, Tom? I don't want people in school, I want them to affect my mark. Yeah? Yeah, no, it won't be JavaScript. It'll be Unity 3D. When I put it up on Blackboard. That was just an example, right? But I want you, this is for you. This is your template. So you put whatever technology you're going to use. Unity 3D with the C# programming language, as an example, right? That's the one you want to put up. And you'll be detailing the stuff you'll be building. Like if I'm going to build a VR project, you say building a VR project utilizing the Unity 3D game engine and C#, the C# programming language. So here we, you can see that you're going to sign off, but then your peer review, like I said, is very important. If you don't fill out your peer review, let's say every time we come up, I'll say, okay, guys, your peer review is due by next week. That's an individual thing. That is not a team thing. Everybody's going to put their names of their team members, and if you don't hand it in, then you lose that mark, period. If you decide not to review, then you'll just keep losing marks, because that's part of the whole retrospective, the whole process of how things went and everything else. It's part of what we do with Agile. It's keeping it transparent. I think transparency is really important from a team perspective. And also it helps us make sure that everyone's productive. Okay, that's what I want to do. I'm not trying to nail anybody and say, like, for example, you know what? Person A doesn't like person B. And you know what? Person B is just not popular. So we're going to just nail person B with bad reviews. Right? That's not how it works. If a person B is productive, even if people don't like him, typically we don't care, right? That's realistically how it really works. Any questions around this semester? I've tried to frame it for you a little bit as possible. I'm trying to make it exciting for you guys to build something. I know it's hard on a Friday afternoon, close to the end of the day, the end of the week for us to be excited about stuff. But for me, I'm excited because I think there's something we can build in VR or in AR to make it interesting. I know that it's not a pure VR course and like a technical course. It's not that. But we're going to take away some really key skills when it comes to Agile project management, which is by far one of the most important things on a resume. Like, do you know how to do Agile? Do you know the Agile tool set? If you don't know those things, you're not going to get hired, chances are, by a company. If when you do an interview, it'll be a failing. It'll be a weakness in your interview, right? So I want to try and help you out with that and make sure that it's a strength rather than a weakness. But that's all I wanted to say today. I wanted to kind of do that, kind of a overview of that. Again, if you haven't had a chance to do this already, please sign up for Slack. I'm going to be putting updates on Slack in terms of our links and different things to help you. And also you can use Slack to do your teamwork. One thing to note from a norms perspective, I know you guys have heard this before, is please use the general channel on Slack. It's only for our announcements. Okay, so please don't say, hi, how you doing? Whatever, don't share your cat videos here. It's the random channel, okay? If you're gonna do your cat videos, do it there. Keep it clean, okay? We'll be removing and moderating a little bit. So if I see really things that shouldn't be on Slack, I'll just take it off. Yeah, is that okay? Yeah, no, we'll do it next week. Like again, I'm gonna try and isolate this class. I wanna make this class so it's encapsulated. So the stuff we do in class is what we produce, right? Even if it's not, it may not be, the next VR game that you're going to sell, on Steam. Okay, I'm not expecting that. I'm talking about things that are reasonable, that we can practice our Agile methodologies. There might be some classes like that, and that you can do well on your test and your final presentation if we have an opportunity to do that. Looks like you got to go. See you later. Otherwise, any questions before we stop for the day? Okay, guys, I'm going to stick around for any other questions if you guys want to talk to me personally. But otherwise, I'll see the rest of you next week.